Tonight we're going to be covering chapter 8, but we had one final lament. I didn't realize I had forgotten or left off Val. And so Val is going to share his lament with us. I hope the lament's not about being forgotten, because then I'll feel really bad. But yeah, Val, take it away.
All right. Okay, let me see. Okay, so my God, my Savior, creator of heaven and earth, you are high and exalted in the heavens above. From everlasting to everlasting, you are the one true God. Yet you know each and every one of us intimately, and you are closer to us than our next breath. The snares of the evil one surround me daily. Their deadly enticements distract me from the truth and bring me down to sorrowful pain and exile from God. Their relentless accusations consume my thoughts as early as the sun rises from the east. Guilt, fear, and regrets follow me throughout my day. Surely I have sinned against the Lord alone. My past acts of pride and greed are before me in the corner of my eye. Bitterness and regrets tore my heart to pieces. Oh, that I could turn back time and seek his counsel before my ways. This worldly sorrow tightened the grip on my possession. Fear of earthly loss suffocates me spiritually. The evil one tries to terrify me with his arsenal, and my vigor melts within me as a candle wick is consumed by fire. Why are you so downcast within me, my soul? Yes, let me bear the Lord's wrath for the sin I have done, until he pleads my case and upholds my cause. Then I will see the Lord's mercy and grace in my times of need. Though I have fallen, I will rise again, and the Lord will be my righteousness. I will remember the certificate of death that has been torn on the cross, and the eternal inheritance that you have bestowed on your children. Arise, O Lord, and rescue me from the miry clay. Lead me in the path of righteousness for your name's sake. Make me experience again the fullness of joy in your presence and the pleasures at your right hand. Then my lips and tongue shall sing of your praises all the days of my life. The Lord of hosts, the great I am, the immovable rock, the commanding King of kings, the victorious warrior, you are my Prince of Peace.
Wow, Val, that was really good.
Thanks.
What was your inspiration for this?
I don't know. It's just lately every time I wake up, there's been this I don't know, this pressure and just unrest and uneasiness, and in my heart about like past sins and past regrets and bitterness that just keep kind of haunting me. So I just wanna. It feels like the evil one is kind of taunting me, like, "Hey, you're already falling. Like you're down, and there's nobody to help you." And then it just Micah 7 come to my mind. Micah 7 verse 8 to 9. And just like sometimes I just quote that, do not gloat over me, my enemy, because even though, yeah, I'm down right now, but I know, I'm sure that the Lord will be my righteousness and he will vindicate me. So just, the Micah 7 really resonates with me right now.
Yeah, I think, a lot of times we try to earn merit with God. This is kind of a pre-salvation, very common view. I'm trying to work my way to heaven. I'll do good deeds that'll outweigh my bad deeds. And, then we hear, okay, there's nothing good that we can actually do. Then we hear that salvation is a free gift. And then we realize like Jesus paid for this free gift. It wasn't actually free. It's just free to us. And so a lot of times people deal with this guilt of, even in their, like new life in Christ life, this need to kind of pay for things or to try to make it up, or this constant guilt of like, yeah, but you don't know how bad I really was or how bad I am, or these things that I carry. And I was counseling a young man one time, and he's saying, no, you don't understand. I've done these things. And I said, hey, look, you're in Christ, and God is the king, and the king has said you're clean and you're free and clear. And so for you to sit there and say you're dirty, it's no longer a question about what have you done. It's a question about now you're disagreeing with the king who's declared you clean, and he's declared you free from the charges that were going to kill you. And so it's sort of like you've moved on to the second level where it's no longer about what did you do and what actually happened, because God has said, hey, that's done with. And you're saying, no, 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 you don't understand. It's still around. And so that's a hard truth to live in, to accept that, when God says, I declare you righteous, which this is what we call justification, right? When God justifies us when we're saved, even though we have done these things and we feel this guilt, to God, these things are gone. And when we just sit there and linger on them, I think you're right to go, okay, this is something from the enemy, not from God, because God has said, no, my righteousness is covering you, you're clean. So if we hang on to it, basically we're telling God, hey, your righteousness is not enough, which obviously is a slap in his face, which is what I was telling this young man. I was like, look, you can't, when God says you're clean, now it's, do you trust him and do you agree with him, or are you smarter than the king is? And so that's a sobering lesson. But good job, Val. That was really well done.
Thank you.
Okay, so let's look at chapter 8. I was reviewing chapter 8 today, and there's just so much. Oh, before we get to chapter 8, I forgot last week. Last week we were talking about this verse right here. Surely there's not a righteous man on earth. No, sorry, no. Do not take all the things to heart that people say, lest you hear your servant cursing you. Your heart knows that many times you yourself have cursed others. Pascal has this really good quote right here. He says, human life is nothing but perpetual illusion. There is nothing but mutual deception and flattery. No one talks about us in our presence as he would in our absence. Human relations are only based on this mutual deception, and few friendships would survive if everyone knew what his friend said about him behind his back. Oh, man, that's
Whoa.
Truer words, right? Yeah, Pascal is pretty sharp mind, particularly considering how young he was when he wrote everything. All right, so let's look at chapter 8. This is kind of a continuation. So last week in chapter 7, we were dealing with sort of a practical interlude, a practical application, as Solomon is sitting back and pondering what are all the things that he's seen and experienced and what is the meaning of it. And now he's kind of taking a second take on that as he reflects on some other items that he's brought up. So one of the themes he's brought up throughout the book has been this topic of injustice or oppression, those two kind of going hand in hand. And so now he's going to reflect back on the meaning of those things. So chapter 8, he says, who is like the wise, and who knows the interpretation of a thing? A man's wisdom makes his face shine, and the hardness of his face is changed. I say, keep the king's command because of God's oath to him. Do not be hasty to go from his presence. Do not take your stand in an evil cause, for he does whatever he pleases. For the word of the king is supreme, and who may say to him, what are you doing? Whoever keeps a command will know no evil thing, and the wise heart will know the proper time and the just way. For there is a time and a way for everything, although man's trouble lies heavily on him. For he does not know what is to be, for who can tell him how it will be? No man has power to retain the spirit or power over the day of death. There is no discharge from war, nor will wickedness deliver those who are given to it. All this I observed while applying my heart to all that is done under the sun, when man had power over man to his hurt. Then I saw the wicked buried. They used to go in and out of the holy place and were praised in the city. And when they had done such things, this also is vanity, because the sentence of against an evil deed is not executed speedily. The heart of the children of man is fully set to do evil. Though a sinner does evil 100 times and prolongs his life, yet I know that it will be well with those who fear God, because they fear before him. But it will not be well with the wicked, neither will it prolong his days like a shadow, because he does not fear before God. There's a vanity that takes place on this earth, that there are righteous people to whom it happens according to the deeds of the wicked, and there are wicked people to whom it happens according to the deeds of the righteous. I said that this also is vanity, and I commend joy, for man has nothing better than under the sun to eat and drink and be joyful, for this will go with him in his toil through the days of his life that God has given him under the sun. When I applied my heart to know wisdom and to see the business that is done on the earth, how neither day nor night do one's eyes see sleep. Then I saw all the work of God, that man cannot find out what work that is done under the sun. However much man may toil in seeking, he will not find it out, even though a wise man claims to know. He cannot find it out. So he bookends this chapter with a little bit of pessimism about wisdom. Verse 1, who is like the wise and who knows the interpretation of a thing? He's kind of saying, nobody can answer this question I'm about to pose. And then he closes with, even though a wise man claims to know, he can't find it out. So he's a little bit pessimistic about what are the things that can be known. And we see this also reflected in the book of Job. So Job, most of the book is him and his three friends kind of having a circular conversation where they're trying to say, well, maybe it's because you did this, or maybe you did that. That's why this bad thing happened to you. And but by the end of the book, God is talking to Job, and God says, okay, I'll answer your questions. And then he just asks Job, 50 something questions right there at the end about, were you there when I put the stars in the heaven? Can you tell me how many, hand breadths the ocean is? Can you tell me this? What about that? And so he doesn't actually answer anything. I think as this is maybe more of a Western problem, but we just have this intense desire to know. There's been many points in my life where I feel like God has sent me on a fool's errand. And really, I'm okay with this because, there are many prophets that he sent on fool's errands, like Isaiah and Jeremiah. He tells them, hey, you're going to go to these people, and I'm going to stop up their ears and harden their hearts so that they won't listen to you. But you're going to go anyway. And so it's not about effectiveness or efficiency. It's about obedience. And so that's what I'm calling a fool's errand. But for me, I'm not like Isaiah or Jeremiah where I go, all right, I'll go. My typical first response is, I want to understand why. Tell me why I'm going on the fool's errand. And I'll do it. I'll still obey. I want to understand. I want to know. And I think oftentimes when we put our understanding in front of obedience, we run into a problem because God doesn't promise to explain it all to us. In fact, this opening verse, the part that I referenced in Job and many, many, many other places throughout the Bible, seem to express that God's ways are not our ways, his ways are higher than our ways, his thoughts are not our thoughts, et cetera, et cetera. And so there's no promise that we will understand it better by and by, as the old hymn says, even though I love that hymn. That's not a biblical promise. That's just our hope, is that we'll understand it better by and by. So his first opening bit here, he talks about kind of the supremacy of the king. Verse 2, he says, I say, keep the king's command because of God's oath to him. And he talks about kind of the unbridledness of the king's power. If the king says this, who's going to say, well, what do you mean? Right? That's his argument. It says right there in verse 4, for the word of the king is supreme, and who may say to him, what are you doing? No one questions the king and asks him what he's doing. And so he's throwing this out there to be cautious of people in power, because when people in power have the power, the people without the power have nothing, right? There's no recourse. I mean, we are blessed in this country um, to be a country of laws and of checks and balances. But if you put this form of government on a timeline, this is such an oddity. This is such a recent invention to have this ability to have checks and balances where you can be a poor person in this country and still expect and very typically receive justice. Um, but this is not a common global trend even today, and this is not a historic trend throughout most of the world. Most of the world, if you're rich, you get treated one way. If you're poor, you get treated another way. And so that's the human norm to which he is speaking. So he's saying, hey, watch out, because people in power, they've kind of got it all, and no one's going to question them on your behalf. Now he goes on, he's not really extolling the virtue of power. So some people would think, well, okay, if he's saying the king's command is that great, well, let's just get power then, because that's where it's at. And he goes on in verse 7, he says, verse 8, rather, he says, no man has the power to retain the spirit. Another translation says, no one has the power over the wind. And I think that's a great example of what he's getting at. So the king's power is immense, but it's also unbridled. It's unpredictable. It can go this way this day and that way another day. You think back on the book of Esther, right? It starts with the king and his wife. We don't know exactly what he was asking her to do, but he asked her to do something she wasn't comfortable with. She says no, she's done with. Then you see Esther come in, and she takes such precaution because this man's word, even though she's the wife, that doesn't mean anything, right? He snaps his finger and says off with her head, his guards are going to kill her. So he's comparing it to wind here, or spirit is another word. It's a Hebrew word that could mean either. No man can harness and has power over the wind. We have these micro ways that we control wind, right? You think of a sailboat or a parachute or a hang glider or an airplane. We have these small ways that we interplay or integrate with the wind a little bit, but we can't control the wind. Hurricane Harvey, tornadoes, all of these different things that the wind does. Even when we try to harness it with, wind farms, I don't know if you've seen videos of one of those generators exploding, but there's a video floating around of one of the wind being so strong and the brakes on the windmill didn't work, and so it's just spinning faster and faster and faster. So even our few attempts, I mean, there's so many examples of boats that have sunk, of planes that have crashed. And so on the one hand, wind has great power and great potential, but it also has great danger. And so he's advising a strong, strong, strong caution. And the reason is in verse 9, he says, all of this I have observed while applying my heart to all that is done under the sun, when man had power over man to his hurt. So he's saying, look, I've observed this when one man has power over another person to his hurt. I look at this today and I think through all that our culture's been through, our country's been through in the past couple of weeks with the police killing the man in Minneapolis, St. Paul. And it's very easy to find examples in our world of people who have had power exerted over them to their hurt, whether they deserved it or not. Power gets out of hand and bad things happen. And then you look at the protests and you see where, the protests trying to find justice for this man, justice for the Black community, have been burning down shops. There's one of the saddest videos online. It's this African-American man standing there in the street screaming / weeping, why are you burning down my store? This is my life savings. This is my life work. This is my store. Um, the tragedy of power being exerted one over another, and this to someone's hurt. And so he goes on in verse 10, he says, I saw the wicked buried. They used to go in and out of the holy places and were praised in the city where they had done such things. This also is vanity, because the sentence against an evil deed is not executed speedily. The heart of the children of man is fully set to do evil. That is such a true verse. And again, it's something that's so applicable today. We're watching mob violence. We're watching what starts with a peaceful protest, and then things start getting broken, and then very quickly everything starts going haywire. And this is the problem with mob violence, is that in those moments, everyone goes, oh, it's okay to behave in this alternate way that we would never normally do. We wouldn't normally go and steal and loot stores, but now that everybody's doing it, well, let's get ours. We saw this in the Middle East when we were there during the Arab Spring. Was once it turns from peaceful protest to mob violence, there's no stopping it. Anderson Cooper came down to the mob down there in the middle of the city, and there's a video of him getting punched, and his commentary after, he's completely shocked that they attacked him. And I remember hearing his commentary on what happened to him and just dying laughing, because I thought, well, what did you expect to happen? You literally, you're white haired, you stand out. You stick out like a sore thumb in that crowd. The moment one person decides that they're angry, you're the target. But when the sentence against an evil deed is not executed speedily, the heart of the children of man is fully set to do evil. We've got a new little puppy, and this is a hard thing to teach the children, that every ounce of training that we're putting in right now is going into the dog's future. And every ounce of training that we're not putting in right now is also going into right now is forming the dog into who he will be. And so if we are diligent as trainers, and if we're successful as trainers, he will do well. If we're not, his heart is going to be set to do evil fully. And so this is an interesting principle to think through, as we think about, our own life. So let's start at the personal level, right? We can think of our own individual sin patterns. These typically start as attitudes or feelings. And because of this, they develop into some small act, which typically goes into some larger act, which, if done over time, this becomes a pattern. It becomes a trajectory. And so if we're not self-disciplined to root out, evil motives and hard attitudes and all of that, then our heart is set to do these things. Well, I can't tell you the number of times that someone's come to myself or Jonathan, with marriage struggles, and I think, man, if they had come, 6 months ago, a year ago, 5 years ago, this would be not a piece of cake, because we're all sinners living in in sinful relationships with each other. So everything is going to be messy, but it's so much simpler than once I'm set in my sin pattern for years and years and years, and this has just become the norm through my life. Now changing that, it's that whole expression, you can't teach an old dog new tricks. So we can apply this individually and go, okay, when we set ourselves in a sin pattern, this turns from an individual sin to a pattern to an addiction that we can't kick. And this is problematic. But we could look in our church life and go, okay, what are we look at the family level, at the church level, at the societal level, and go, what sins are we allowing into our life that, start as little seeds and then just grow and grow and grow. And so I think this verse is very, very applicable. What do you see in this verse that as it relates to what's going on in our country right now?
Well, what I see is it talks about the sentence against an evil deed. And I know a lot of the protest and so forth is because uh, the initial officer was not arrested or charged in a timely manner. He wasn't, according to our standards because of what he did. And I realize police have procedures with these things, but according to us out here in the periphery, we see as they didn't do it quick enough.
Uh-huh.
The people that were watching and uh, whatever, they weren't sentenced or anything done to them. So it seems like nothing is being done by the police to punish this man. And I realize now charges have been made and upgraded and so forth. But the longer you wait, it seems the worse it gets.
Mm-hmm.
Because people say that waiting is not activity.
Right. Yeah. Well, and it's interesting to see the growth of the protest, right? So the protest initially is a call for this officer should be charged. And that's turned into now everybody with any axe to grind whatsoever is now doing that. So like now it's this, I was talking with Blandon, I think most of y'all know him, and he has very interesting views on all of this stuff. You should definitely chat with him sometime. And he goes, what are they even protesting about anymore? You know, is there a law that they're trying to get enacted? Is it, what is the ask is kind of his critique of what's going on right now. And so even on this side, because it's not being met with speedily, it's gotten way off of track of what it was initially about. And now it's all, everything's just kind of getting put up under this big umbrella. So he was telling me some things about, the Black Lives Matter movement. And I think, particularly for us in our church, we're probably more aware of race issues than the average church, just because we have so many different nations here and it affects us in different ways. I think it's easy for us to be very quick to jump on, the bandwagon for things. So please don't hear me say that Black lives do not matter. That's not what I'm saying. I think Black lives matter. I think white lives matter. I think all lives matter. I think, but there's a political movement called Black Lives Matter, a social movement called Black Lives Matter, that Blandon is talking about it. And he says, this group is headed up by a lesbian and a transgender person. And honestly, he was kind of comparing it to like a Trojan horse, where it starts with something that we all go, yeah, that makes sense at a basic human level, that all people deserve, the essential human rights. But he goes, what they're doing is they're also including all these special agenda things that nobody knows about it. He's like, and then you get down to like the very popular kind of Facebook level, and people in support of let's end racism are actually supporting a group that, as Christians, there's many things about them that we wouldn't agree with. But obviously in our world, you can't say anything about it because then, well, you're a racist and you're just sticking up for whatever. And that's not necessarily true. And so he's actually duly conflicted. I'm trying to get him and some others to do a panel discussion with me so we can bring this about, because he speaks to this much more eloquently than I am. I'm butchering what he says. But as an African American, he feels very conflicted is not it, but like he gets shot at by his own side because they have this expectation that he support everything that the movement expresses because of his ethnicity. And he goes, well, actually, I'm a thinking individual, and I'm a Christian before I'm African American, which is how we should all think about our race and nationality. Is like, I'm a Christian first, and then I'm an American, or I'm a Christian first, and then I'm a white guy, or whatever. And so, yeah, it's fascinating. And in fact, this actually leads us into our next section here. In verse 14, he says, there's a vanity that takes place on earth, that there are righteous people to whom it happens according to the deeds of the wicked, and there are wicked people to whom it happens according to the deeds of the righteous. So basically he's saying life is not fair. Bad things happen to good people, good things happen to bad people, and there's no making sense of it. But in this specific instance that we're talking about, with the protests and whatnot, it seems like to not just go along with the flow is viewed as bad, even if you're doing it for good reasons, right? Even if you're saying, well, actually the group that's running this has some serious things that as a Christian I can't support, that's problematic. I face this issue all the time with my background in the Middle East and with working with Muslims because, I've grown up in strong Christian circles, but a lot of times strong Christian circles are very conservative politically, and I certainly fit that model. But oftentimes people who are very conservative politically are very anti-immigration, anti-Muslim, et cetera, et cetera. And so it's easy to let politics drive and start informing our Christianity rather than the reverse. And so to actually be in that circle and to be asking the questions of, okay, sure, do I support smaller government? Yes. Less taxes? Yes. Like all those things. And then it comes to issues of, what do I think about immigration or immigrants? A lot of people can't separate how they think about immigration and how they think about immigrants in particular. And, that's where I go, well, we should have laws that end human exploitation. And honestly, that position puts me at odds with two different camps, right? So the one camp who says, we're Christian, we should just let everybody in. And I say, well, when you let people in that are illegal, that means employers can exploit them. As a Christian, I can't support exploitation, right? I want them to be protected under the law. I want them to be able to go to a police officer and say, someone is, trying to exploit me or pay me less or whatever. But if they're here illegally, they can't do that because that's the big threat. But then on the other side to say, well, like God doesn't care about our borders. Like God has, Act 17, God's established borders and time periods so that people would seek him. This is a very different view than most people on my camp would have on immigration, which is a more open view of it. So it's a weird place to be. So there's a lot of these issues where you just pick the issue and go, okay, well, if you speak out from a Christian standpoint, that will very often put you at odds with both camps. And because of this, you will fit this verse, right? You will be the good person that bad things happen to, or you'll be labeled as bad simply because you have a position that's not in step with what the culture says our position should be. And that's kind of a challenging place to be. Have any of you experienced this in your own life or seen an example of it? So he comes back and he keeps cycling through his advice or his sort of, here's the sum total or the bare minimum. And then we see that in verse 15. He says, and I commend joy for man has nothing, and I commend joy, for man has nothing better under the sun but to eat, drink, and be joyful, for this will go with him in his toil through the days of his life that God has given him under the sun. So as we sit back and try to lay chapter on chapter on chapter and go, all right, what's the thread that we can pull through all of these? One of them is a little bit of cynical wisdom. So we might be struggling with meaning in life because life isn't meeting our expectations. I expected to be a millionaire by the time I was 20, and I'm not. I expected to have a Ferrari, and I don't. I expected, to have 10 kids or to not have any kids. Or like, we have these things of what we want and what we set as, here's my trajectory to my own happiness. And then it doesn't happen that way. So I think some of what Solomon would say is, get over it. Life's not fair, or it doesn't work. Like we set a false happiness as our goal, and then we don't hit the goal, and so we feel miserable. But he's saying, well, life is, it's kind of miserable. There is this miserable side where it's drudgery and it's work. Now, if we take this book and we lay it in all of Scripture, we go, okay, why is that? Let's go back to the garden. God made a perfect world. Adam and Eve sinned. Sin entered the world, and it's having its effects on everything. God created Adam and Eve to live in perfect harmony together. That would be amazing in a relationship. not just a marriage relationship, but in any interpersonal relationship. So, and yet sin entered the world, and now they're still married. They still have to live with each other, but they're both sinners. And so this complicates everything. It complicates every single family from that point afterwards. And so if we look at, well, why is work drudgery? I think to the guy who took me offshore fishing for the first time, and I thought, and said out loud to him, man, you've got the best, I was 12, 13, man, you've got the best job in the world. And he said, well, it's a job. And at the time I thought, that guy's an idiot. And now I realize, no, he's telling the truth. You could be, if you think being a rock star is fun, once you have to do it for money, it's, you got to wake up, you got to put the hours in practicing, traveling, it seems glamorous, but it's actually just a job at the end of the day. So I think part of Solomon's advice would be get over yourself. You set a false expectation without the understanding that work is drudgery. Going to college is drudgery. Even graduating, it's a moment of fun and excitement, but then you get a job and now that's drudgery. Having children is a delight and a blessing, but there's also very intense, physical labor for the woman, but then just a general labor of love, which includes lots of work and energy. And so on the one hand, he would say, well, throw out your kind of Pollyanna views on the world, where everything's just going to be sunny side up for you. At the same time, the flip side of that is, hey, enjoy those moments. Enjoy the moments with your kids that are just pure joy. My favorite time is when they're a baby. And, well, one of my favorite times, I should say. They're a baby and they just sit on your shoulder and they sleep. They're almost an inanimate object. They wake up every now and then, but I know, give them 6 months or a year and they're going to be trying to walk and crawl and climb. And, then before long, I'm just trying to lure them to come sit with me. I do this with Jack all the time. Hey buddy, you want to come see what I have over here? Come sit in my lap for a few minutes. Right. He's such a busy little guy. He just wants to always be doing and going. And, so that moment of, just feeling a baby's breath on you, it's a fleeting moment, but it's a beautiful moment. And so he would say, look, get your Pollyanna views, throw those out. Life is going to be difficult, but there's going to be time to eat and drink and be joyful. I think our problem, or my problem, maybe I should say, is sometimes it's easy to get focused on work. And maybe this is probably true if you have a job that is very people oriented, like for me being a pastor, maybe if you're a teacher or a nurse, where you think you kind of get an emergency mindset. I can't take a break because if I take a break, this person on life support is going to die, or these students aren't going to get taught, or this stuff at church is not going to happen. There was a book we read as a small group, and they were talking about taking time for rest. And the lady tells a story about this missionary who comes to Latin America, and she's always busy, always working. And in her mind, she goes, well, God's called me to do this work, so I'm just going to do this 24/7. And she noticed the locals would have these parties all the time. So they would work and then they'd have a party. And finally, one of them said, you don't act like you want to stay here a long time. And she goes, well, what do you mean? I'm busy working. They go, yeah, that's exactly it. If you don't take time for rest and enjoyment, you're not going to last long. And so you should act like you want to be here for a while and enjoy yourself. And so obviously there's a balance there. We can't always party. I think he talks about that in one of the earlier chapters. But we have to break ourselves away from everything is always work to going, all right, how do we punctuate our life and our week with special times? And one way, not that we want to become legalistic about this, but one way is the practice of Sabbath, actually taking rest, taking time away from our daily grind. Even now in COVID, we still need to take time and set a special time aside where we focus on God, where we turn from our normal pattern of daily business, even if our daily business is fun. I've been getting back into cycling, and it's a little bit addictive, and I also have a bit of addictive personality. And so I just want to cycle every day that I can. And consciously, I tell myself I'm going to take one day where I don't get on a bike at all. Because that's important to have enjoyment here, there has to be the break. One, so my physical body can recuperate. But, we set aside time, and I think this is why it's important for us to, I realize we can't necessarily physically attend church right now, but setting aside time for Bible study and group fellowship, even though it's happening online, this is an important get away from the normal grind that helps us then get back to the normal grind, and there's more meaning and purpose in that normal grind. God is not anti-work. God gave Adam and Eve work to do, but he's also not a workaholic. God himself took a day of rest. And so this is kind of permission / commandment for us to likewise take a day of rest and not think that we're more omnipotent than God is. And so even in this verse 15, he's commending joy. He says, and I commend joy. Like, that's just a blanket statement. And then the very last, there's kind of this comma down here halfway through. It says, for this will go with him in his toil through the days of his life that God has given him under the sun. So here he's saying, experience joy. And then he's going, because there's toil. So I think it's easy to get so buried and so focused on work. And I think culturally, this is one of our culture's sins that we as Americans struggle with, is overworking. And he's saying, have some enjoyment so that this will get you through the toil and through the work of it all. So if we think through, how do we create these times of intentional celebration, not a party lifestyle, but saying, okay, I'm going to celebrate things. And this helps us provide more meaning to things like birthdays, anniversaries, religious holidays, Christmas, Easter, Thanksgiving, that kind of thing. Instead of these just being, all right, this is just a day to eat a lot of food and I get to hang out, to see these as, all right, God, this is a time where I'm pausing all of the toil that I'm supposed to be doing because that's part of life. This is a time where I pause that and I just celebrate. And I'm not thinking about bills, and I'm not thinking about work projects, and I'm not thinking about, my to-do list. I'm thinking about, man, this tastes good and I love these people around me and I'm having such a good time. Because at some point Monday's coming back around and I'm going to be back in traffic and, back on the phone calls and back to the grind. So I think that concludes our passage tonight. Again, he reiterates that take time to enjoy what your toil is providing, because otherwise it really is just foolishness.